So we will begin our morning with this great topic. My name's Bill Norton, and I'm with Tea Party Patriots. And we've got a fantastic panel that we'll introduce to you here in just a moment. I'm going to start the program off this morning to talk a little bit about really what this issue is truly about. This IRS scandal is not about the IRS targeting the Tea Party or conservative groups. It's about the government overreaching when it comes to principles of free speech. And so that's really the key things that we want to focus on. So I just want to talk a little bit about free speech. I've got a couple of great quotes from a couple founders that will kind of put this entire panel in perspective on kind of why we're having this discussion and why it's very important. Now, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about a gentleman by the name of Algernon Sidney. So Algernon Sidney once said, "The best legacy I can leave my children is free speech and the example of using it." Now, the reason why this is very significant from Algernon Sidney is because Algernon Sidney was going around during the time of Charles II and talking about how there was no such thing as the divine right of kings. Well, Charles II didn't like to hear that because Charles II was talking about how there was the divine right of kings. And so Charles II had Algernon Sidney beheaded. And so John Locke came along, and John Locke began saying basically the same types of things. There's no such thing as the divine right of kings. But he went to Holland in exile so he could say it from a safer distance, right? Because he learned very quickly, and as we have seen through history, that when we start saying things bad about our rulers and our government, quite often there's a lot of payment that has to be made to those leaders. And so John Locke began saying the same thing. Now, John Locke was involved in orchestrating what we call the Glorious Revolution, and he helped to overthrow King James II, and then John Locke was finally able to return back home to England. But it's an important lesson that we learn about Algernon Sidney and John Locke and the importance of being able to freely express our opinions, and especially about our government and about our leaders. Thomas Jefferson said, "The liberty of speaking and writing guards our other liberties." So it's one of the first and foremost liberties that we must protect. Now, I've got a couple of lengthy quotes here that I'm going to go through because they just embody everything that I believe is important to free speech. Benjamin Franklin said, and this is in 1722, when under his pen name Silence Dogood, he said, "Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech, which is the right of every man, as far as by it he does not hurt or control the right of another. This sacred privilege," he said, is too essential to free governments that the security of property and the freedom of speech always go together. And in those wretched countries where man cannot call his tongue his own, he can scarce call anything else his own. Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech, a thing terrible to public traitors, he said. And then he goes on, that men ought to speak well of their governors is true, while their governors deserve to be well spoken of. But to do public mischief without hearing of it, that is free speech, is only the prerogative and felicity of a tyrant. A free people will be shewing that they are so by their freedom of speech. Pretty clear if a people is not free, if they're not able to express their freedom of speech. It ought to be the ambition, Franklin continues, of all honest magistrates to have their deeds openly examined and publicly scanned. Only the wicked governments of men dread what is said of them. 1722, Benjamin Franklin said that. And then in 1787, Thomas Jefferson said, "I am persuaded myself that the good sense of the people will always be found to be the best army. They may be led astray for a moment, but will soon correct themselves. The people are the only censors of their governors, and even their errors will tend to keep these to the true principles of their institution. Now that's an interesting statement from Jefferson. Even if the people are wrong, even if what they're expressing with their free speech is wrong, it still will serve as a check and balance to the institutes of government. And so even if the people are wrong, it remains important that we are able to express ourselves in those errors. And then he goes on, to punish these errors too severely would be to suppress the only safeguard of the public liberty. The basis of our governments being the opinion of the people, the very first object should be to keep that right. Do not be too severe upon their errors, but reclaim them by enlightening them. If once they become inattentive to the public affairs, speaking of the people and their free speech, you and I, he's talking about himself, right? And the other leaders of the country, and Congress and assemblies, judges and governors shall all become wolves. Even Jefferson recognizes that without free speech, he himself may become a wolf. Very, very important. And then one of my greatest quotes that I love, and the last one I'll share with you. I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of society but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education. This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power. So in order for a nation to be free, we must be free to speak. And it's amazing what has happened to mankind in the 200 plus years that we have codified the freedom of speech in the Bill of Rights. We have gone further, mankind has gone further in 200 years than we went in the 5,000 year previous. And I believe that one of those reasons why we've done that is because we've had the freedom to exchange information and the freedom to be the ultimate check to our institutes of government. So the freedom of speech, very, very essential. And so I just go through those brief quotes to again express why we are here and why we're talking about this issue today. Again, it's not about the Tea Party targeting, it's about targeting of free speech. So with that, I'll introduce and turn the time over to Carrie Pickett with Breitbart News, and she will be our moderator this morning.
Thank you, Bill. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming here today. We have a wonderful panel here. I want to point out, if you haven't noticed what they all have in common, all of them have stood up for others who were silenced by the government, or they themselves were silenced. Most of them are veterans of the conservative movement. Many of them have attended CPAC for years. So I'm happy to introduce Jordan Sekulow. He's a lawyer over at the American Center for Law and Justice. Cleta Mitchell, my very first CPAC. I saw her here about, my goodness, like 14 years ago. And she's been coming still every single year, of course. She's a partner at the law firm of Foley and Lardner. It's a Washington, D.C. law firm. You've seen her very often on Fox News, just like Jordan as well, standing up for whistleblowers. Jenny Beth Martin, another regular over on Fox News. She's a co-founder of the Tea Party Patriots. Kevin Kukaji of Linchpins of Liberty. He will talk to us about his own experiences of being targeted by the IRS, so definitely look forward to that. Hans von Spakovsky. I can never say your name, Hans. Hans von Spakovsky. There we go. I still can't say your name, and I've known you now for several years. This guy took on Eric Holder with the Black Panthers, okay? Amazing man. He's over at the Heritage Foundation now, and he's still taking on Eric Holder. And finally, right on his left, because I jumped over him, there's Tom Fitton, and he's with Judicial Watch. Don't mess with Tom Fitton, because I'll tell you, he will whip up a FOIA and he'll find everything on you. So let's get started. Jordan, I'm curious here. Now, what are your thoughts on Lois Lerner once again pleading the Fifth in Congress? Are we ever going to find out what she knows and when she knew it?
You know, it's interesting, and I want to thank Tea Party Patriots for having this panel today. It was 2 years ago that we began representing, actually this month, the 41 clients we represent in our lawsuit against the IRS. And there's a lot has changed. You know, on the positive side, before we get into the trying to get to the information, I would say that in a sense it's united and reunited this movement to take on the IRS, filing lawsuits against the IRS, standing up to the IRS, people coming together and saying, I got audited, or, you know, the IRS is preventing me from, getting through to my 501c4 status. This was not something people waved around a couple of years ago, and so we didn't know necessarily the extent of the IRS wrongdoing. And I think what we've seen now is, one, when we come together, you can take on the IRS. And we saw that just about a week and a half ago with the C4 proposal to change the rules. Even after Tea Party Patriots finally gets their status, the idea that you would moot that status out by effectively changing the rules of the game, and what we've called this kind of post hoc, Lois Lerner written justification for the wrongdoing that's occurred that the IRS apologized for. And the IRS commissioners backed off those rules. There were over 140,000 comments. People used to not speak out when it came to the IRS and comment publicly on regulations.gov, not a conservative hotbed by any means, and go there and put their name out there, or the organization where we all have to get certified in some way by the IRS.
And let's point out here, with all those hundreds of thousands, or rather thousands of comments, the IRS has to look into every single one.
That's right.
Okay? That must be pointed out there. So they have quite a lot on their hands now. The question is, will they actually do it?
Yeah, so victory part one is that. Victory is just being able to, we're speaking out and we're calling out the IRS, and for the first time we can only do that together. People were not really willing to do that on their own. But as we came together, and you realize you can still push back as we move forward. Now, getting to the answers about the wrongdoing here. Listen, I didn't expect Lois Lerner to testify this week without immunity or without some special deal. I do think, and I raise this because members of Congress have raised this, including Congressman Jordan on our radio broadcast, who's on the Oversight Committee, and this is just something to ponder as we move forward in the panel today, and I'll end it with this on this question, is the idea of what happened in 48 hours where Lois Lerner's attorney was communicating to the Oversight Committee that she'd be willing to give some kind of testimony without immunity. So the idea that she did not believe that it would be incriminating, or that we already know Lois Lerner is the center of this scandal. She's a major part. She's not going to be able to talk her way out of that. The question is she being led from above, from the top, from the sides, which agencies, who in the White House, who in these other branches of government? That's what we need to know, not how involved Lois Lerner is. We all know she's guilty of this targeting. So I suspect what we'll see next is our civil lawsuit, things like that, to get to the truth. There are lots of people involved that can be interviewed, but at the end of the day, the idea, she decided not to testify. Something changed about 48 hours before that hearing, and the attorney, and he put this in writing, our thinking has changed. We don't want to testify anymore. What happened there? It's like another reason to think there's something bigger here than just bad IRS actors.
Thank you, Jordan. Now, let's kind of jump back just a little bit so we can get a little more background. Cleta, how exactly did this IRS targeting start, or rather, when did we really learn about it? Didn't it start back in 2012, or even 2010 for that matter?
Is this on? Is it on? Okay. Well, thank you for having this meeting, Jenny Beth, and having all of this, letting us talk about this very important issue, because I think that it really is, as Bill said, this goes to the very heart of our ability as citizens to exercise our First Amendment rights. My day job is that I always am the consigliere to the vast right-wing conspiracy, but you know, I help people figure out how they can be involved in the policy and political process. It's unfortunate that you have to hire a lawyer for that purpose. I don't think that's what our founding fathers had in mind, but politics and policy are very highly regulated. There are a lot of laws at the local, state, and federal levels that regulate what kind of money you can spend, what kind of structure you have to have, what you can say, when you can say it, what you have to report, what you have to disclose. So, I first began to realize in late 2009, that something had changed at the IRS, because I've been doing this for a long time, and normally when you apply for C4 status, it could be expected to take 3 to 4 weeks, a month, and if you got questions, follow-up questions, you would get them, and they would be about the form that's published on the IRS website, because they have a form. It was published in 1999. Anytime the IRS changes a process or a form, they're supposed to go through a public process where you can have a chance to comment, like we just went through, and you know this is what the law is, this is what the process is, and there's a form, and there are instructions, and those have been in place for a long time. And the truth of the matter is, it wasn't actually, in my experience, very difficult. And the IRS agents who've been processing those applications for decades, since 1959, the rules hadn't changed since 1959, they seem to be doing just fine with it. It's a fairly simple, straightforward process. I applied for C4 status for a group in October 2009, and other than getting an acknowledgement letter 30 days later, and they cashed our filing fee check, we didn't hear from them again until June of 2010. And I didn't hear from Cincinnati. We heard from Washington, the Washington office. And you know what this group did? It was a grassroots group lobbying against Obamacare. And I think that's where it started. Because what you had was, think about the timing. In the February of 2009, the Tea Party movement began spontaneously, of people watching that stimulus package sail through Congress by the Democrats, no Republican votes, watching then the introduction of Obamacare. And, I remember thinking, they can't be serious about this. But they were serious about it. And I think a lot of Americans like me looked at the Congress and said, we need to do something. And people started getting involved and active. The Tea Party Patriots just celebrated its 5-year anniversary last Thursday. But it really, that really started putting the fear in the powers that be in Washington. And then I do have to say that because they were worried about this grassroots opposition that was building spontaneously against Obamacare. And then you had the Citizens United decision in January 2010. Now, what they say it's a cause and effect. They try to make it sound as though all of these groups sprung up in response to Citizens United. That's not true. I mean, they saw Citizens United as suddenly, oh my gosh, this unleashes the power of these people to talk about us at elections. Uh-oh. And so really what you saw was then as organizations got, there was a spontaneous thing, and in the life of any movement, you have the spontaneous things that happen, and then you start trying to figure, okay, how do we structure this to keep it going? Because you can only stay mad for so long. And so through 2010, then groups started to then try to put some meat on the bones of their local efforts. And I see a lot of people nodding. Many people had this experience around the country. And so in 2010, people started to make applications. But the statistics showed that there was no great influx of applications in 2010, even though the left has tried to say that was what happened. But what really began to put the fear of God into Democratic members of Congress and the Obama administration was, oh my gosh, now these people are going to be able to raise and spend money, and they can actually don't have to just talk about issues, they can talk about us. So throughout, and where did it come from? I think, look, Kim Strassel in the Wall Street Journal has documented that Obama gave something like a dozen speeches between July of 2010 and the election in November, castigating these grassroots, shadowy organizations, these dark money groups, and demanding we need to do something to stop this. You had members of the United States Senate, starting with Max Baucus, who I can tell you, I have experience in before the Democrats took control of the Senate, where Max Baucus, as the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, got the IRS to initiate an audit of one of my conservative organization clients. And we went through a 2-year audit, first with their C4, then their C3, and it all came because of Max Baucus and his staff. And so he writes a letter to the IRS demanding that the IRS take action to do something. Subsequently, there were 9 Democratic senators demanding that the IRS do something. Carl Levin there is a record in the media of a 3-hour meeting between Carl Levin and Lois Lerner in May of last year, just about the time that this TICTA report became public. You have Elijah Cummings, and he has a staff member. Remember, all these Democratic members of Congress have staff, and many of them are very far left. Elijah Cummings is the ranking member of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. He was at the time, before 2010, he was the chairman. And he has a staffer who is a real lefty who used to work at the highest levels at the IRS before going to the committee. So look, I mean, that's what was all happening, and it was the Democratic liberal establishment within the administration and within the Congress talking to each other and deciding they had to do something to stop this onslaught of citizens who are becoming so informed they knew more about Obamacare than the elected representatives who voted for it. And so that's where it started, and it hasn't stopped. I just have to say this one more thing. It has not stopped. And we moved heaven and earth. So many people, Jenny Beth, so many people involved in helping to try to get as many comments as possible on the IRS website on these proposed regulations, which would codify the mistreatment that the Tea Party groups suffered and extend that to all C4s. And that closed last Thursday, a week ago today, just yeoman effort, over 145,000 that we know of, and there ultimately maybe more. On Tuesday afternoon of this week, day before yesterday, I get a monthly update called the Exempt Organizations Update. Anybody can sign up for it. It comes once a month. It's usually completely boring. It comes from the IRS. And guess what they announced in this newsletter at 4:55 p.m. on Tuesday of this week? They announced that from now on, any 501c4 applicant whose application seems to imply that the group may be involved in lobbying, which of course remember, 501c4 can spend 100% of its resources involved in lobbying activities, or political campaign activity, that these are the letters and questions that they're going to receive. These are the same questions that hundreds of Tea Party groups received 2 years ago right now.
That is unbelievable, Cleta.
It came out, and I just read, I woke up in the middle of the night yesterday morning, so I was up at 4 in the morning going through emails, and I am reading this, and I mean, it's exactly how I felt when I read the proposed regulations. I thought, these people are relentless, and I haven't even had time to start alerting people. I've told Jenny Beth and Hans, because that's where I always start, but we have to fight again. We have to keep fighting them. I told my husband, I think I'm going to have to be fighting the IRS for the rest of my life because they keep coming up with these things. Because now the question is, what are the guidelines for how they're going to answer the questions? How are they going to judge the answers? It is an abandonment of the rule of law, and we have to stop them.
Cleta, that is unbelievable. And in fact, on my way over here, I was thinking, when they found that private businesses wanted to get involved, even if you were just a professional who wanted to get involved politically, what did they bring about? Oh my God, McCain-Feingold. Right. Boom. And it's like it's always something because they always figure that it's going to be the labor unions who are going to be the only ones who can just funnel money over to the liberals, and they're the only ones who can raise money and who can organize. Everybody else has to shut up and just take it.
That's right. And you got it. It's that simple. That is their plan.
And that brings us to Jenny Beth Martin, who, her group, Tea Party Patriots, was one of the groups, a big group that was targeted by the IRS because her group wanted to organize and also fundraise for certain people who they wanted to see represent the good people here in the United States. Tell us about this, Jenny Beth.
Okay, and you can hear me on, all right. Well, we started right as the modern day Tea Party movement started in 2009, and we went through until December of 2010, and we formally applied for our 501c4 and 501c3 status in December of 2010. And when we did that, we knew, even as we were applying in December of 2010, we were already hearing from groups around the country, from a few groups who were saying it wasn't happening quickly enough. And our attorneys were saying, we're hearing this as well, that it's taking much longer than it had taken before. And so we applied knowing that it might take maybe 6 months instead of 3 weeks or 3 months. And waited and waited and waited and heard nothing at all in all of 2010 from the IRS. And then unless our attorneys called them, in which case they either didn't even return phone calls or just said, yes, we have your application and you'll hear from us soon. And that was it. So then nothing from them in 2011. In 2012, as the healthcare law was being heard at the Supreme Court, we had received letters from them asking all sorts of questions. And other groups around the country, because our group serves as a group that supports other groups around the country, and we do all we can to support these other groups. And in fact, we have Tom from Cincinnati, Ohio in here. His group was one that was targeted. And he's from Cincinnati, and that's where the IRS office is, that they claim was only just this one office who was in charge. It had nothing to do with anyone in D.C. whatsoever. So we had all these questions, and the questions are things like, what's on your Facebook page? And they didn't want just what's on your Facebook page. They wanted hard copy printouts of everything on our Facebook page. And our question back to the IRS is exactly what do you mean by that? Do you mean you want what we posted on our Facebook page, or do you want every single comment of every single person who posted on our Facebook page? Do you want to know every person who's liked us on our Facebook page? At which point does this stop? There was no clarity in some of the questions that they were asking. And in other groups around the country, we're getting similar questions. And in fact, in Cincinnati or the Cincinnati area, there was a man named Justin Bennett Thomas, who one of the questions that the IRS sent to a local group in Ohio, in a different part of Ohio, asked about Justin by name. How did they even know Justin's name, much less why were they asking specifically about him by name? And so we would work as an organization doing the things that we did, protesting in front of the Supreme Court, sending email alerts out, encouraging people to call their members of Congress. And then in the evenings and on weekends, we were working with attorneys and accountants and pulling the mountains and volumes of paper for the IRS to get it to them. And we continued to wait. Lois Lerner admitted that she was indeed targeting. Now, in 2012, it's important to note that in 2012, the IRS, under oath before Congress, under the threat or penalty of perjury, said there was no targeting going on at all. And then in May of 2013, we hear on a conference call, press conference from Lois Lerner, that there was targeting of groups with Tea Party and Patriots and 912 in their names, among other things. And we learned later that groups that wanted to, quote, make America a better place were being targeted, or teaching about the Constitution, which Kevin will talk to you about in just a moment. All of this happened. Well, then in July, last year, and remember that was already over 2 years from when we applied, we received a letter from the IRS saying they were offering us expedited review. It'd been over 2 years, and they were going to offer us expedited review. And as we all know, it's Orwellian language. What they really mean is, since it's already taking you so long, we'll give you some more paperwork to fill out. And in that, they wanted us to say that we would agree to a lower amount of what we were legally allowed to do than groups who already had their status. So because we were targeted, we were going to be held to a different law than the groups who were not. So we refused that, and then we got another round of questions from them. So they've admitted it, Congress is investigating them, and the IRS continued. And so we had to go through and get even more paperwork and information for them last year. Finally, last week, the day before I testified, the day before the comment period for the IRS for the regulations that Cleta was talking about ended, and the day before our 5-year anniversary, all of those events happened on the same day. The day before, not even the day before, hours before, less than 24 hours, we received a call from the IRS to one of our attorneys saying that we were approved and that we'd be getting our paperwork shortly. I wonder if that means 3 more years till we get our paperwork. So it goes on, it still goes on. And we're supposed to think that the day before I testified, receiving a call from the IRS that we were approved, that there's nothing political is going on behind the scenes with the IRS, and that there's no corruption whatsoever.
Jenny, this is, once again, an unbelievable story, and in fact, I tend to wonder, you have the IRS looking into what kind of work you're doing, but then we also heard stories about certain religious groups where they're asking them the content of their prayers. Are we going into, say, First Amendment violations here now?
We are, and you'll notice also if you look at Daryl Ice's Twitter feed from yesterday, he has letters or emails and some of the evidence that the committee has received. And one of the things that was in it is that they were also targeting, there were 3 groups that they were looking at who were involved in Israel. So 3 pro-Israel groups, and it says 3 groups who were concerned about settlements in Israel. So it continues. It wasn't just Tea Party groups. They were infringing on everything within the First Amendment, and the new things that they do, well, what was happening with us through the IRS did not hit on the free press. The new regulations would. Any comment that anyone in a 501c4 organization makes to the media 30 days before primary or 60 days before an election about a sitting member of Congress would have to be counted as political activity, and we would have to assign a value to the quote in the media.
Thank you, Jenny Beth. It's an amazing story. We have Kevin Kookogee, also similarly targeted by the IRS. Tell us about Linchpins of Liberty, what you guys do, and why the IRS wanted you guys to be quiet.
Well, thanks, and thank you, Jenny Beth, for, it's good to be back on this panel against some all-stars. Yes, Linchpins of Liberty is an American leadership development enterprise. Our motto is to challenge the imagination of the rising generation. And we do this by mentoring high school and college students in conservative political philosophy, to give them a taste for freedom and the skills to be free. We filed our application with the IRS on January 3rd, 2011, seeking tax-exempt status as a 501c3 educational organization, an organization whose aims are to develop the moral imagination through the study of history. It wasn't until December 19th, 2013, 35 months after I filed my application, that the IRS granted us status. We are represented by the ACLJ. And it was too late. My organization was killed. In fact, it was really as if a lifeguard had tossed a life preserver to a swimmer who had already drowned. For it took 3 years, multiple tens of thousands of my own dollars, the filing of a lawsuit, congressional testimony, major national media exposure, and along the way, the largest, most intimidating organization in all the world discriminated against me because of my point of view, seeking to condition my rights on how I chose to exercise them. Under threat of perjury, the IRS demanded that I disclose the identities of the students I teach, some of whom are minors. Now imagine if you were the parents of those children and you had entrusted them to me to mentor them. To what end does the government need to know the names of those students? One letter contained in excess of 95 questions, which all the organizations got. It was a template, which, by the way, Carter Hall testified last summer when he was asked by Lois Lerner's superiors to send out a template letter. He said that was inappropriate. These groups are not all the same, and they shouldn't be getting the same letter. Well, among those questions, in addition to asking me for my donor information and member information, they wanted to know my political view on every issue. Every issue. And they wanted to know the political affiliation of my own mentors. Clearly, I had been singled out according to the content of my speech, and it had come at great cost. I lost a $30,000 launch grant that was offered to me by a reputable nonprofit whose executive director advised me that never in his 25 years of making grants had he seen such treatment of a C3 applicant. As Cleta said, it shouldn't have taken more than 2 to 4 months. In fact, the average time that it took for a C3 to receive status before 2010 was between 2 and 4 months. And the nature of those questions was typically administrative. Have you filed your state articles of incorporation? Have you adopted a conflict of interest policy? 6 or 7 questions on one piece of paper, not 95 subparts of a question over 7 pieces of paper, which required 250 pages of response in 10 days. So this was the nature of the response. And at a time, when I first got my letter, it was 4 months into the process. I knew already that I had a target on my back. In fact, there was a friend of mine who was going to be one of my board members. He's conservative, he's a family man, he thinks like we do, 7 children, homeschooler. Even he rolled his eyes at me as if I were mentioning some kind of conspiracy. And it wasn't until this past summer that he took me out for lunch after this whole thing hit the national media, and he apologized. He said, Kevin, when you first told me that this was happening to you 2 years ago, he said, I didn't believe you. And I said, I know, Jack. I said, I saw it in your face, and I wasn't going to take it any further. But that was, we even felt that among friends and among people who you think would view things the way that we do. But there were more costs to me. On the day after we testified June 4th, June 5th, I lost 75% of my business because my largest client advised me that they were uncomfortable with the very public expression of my political views in defense of my constitutional rights. And to make bad matters worse, Congressman Jim McDermott, Democrat from Washington, went on national television a few days later to suggest that I may have been lying before Congress simply because I wasn't under oath when I testified. Well, perhaps Mr. McDermott was projecting because I don't make a distinction whether or not I'm under oath. I tell the truth all the time.
Unbelievable. You know, Chairman Darrell Lysa has made it very clear in the oversight hearings that he said that no matter what you hear from the liberals, that they say, well, you know, progressive groups, they were also targeted too. And he says, no, look, according to TIGTA, they only targeted conservative groups. Don't let anyone ever tell you any different. Okay? I mean, apparently, if that's the case, I guess the IRS had a problem with the word liberty in it. Because I don't know why they'd have a problem with the word linchpin, but you know, liberty, apparently, the IRS, I suppose, they have a problem. But you know, going forward here, Hans von Spakovsky, there, I got it. He has taken on the Justice Department, and I'm sure that he's seen very similar things as well. Have you ever seen something similar like this over the IRS in your experience, Hans?
Well, I haven't, but people I'm sure can quickly Google this and find out that both the Kennedy administration and the Roosevelt administration used the Internal Revenue Service for political purposes, but we've never seen it to this extent. And let me try to talk to you about this from an overall perspective. Okay, with April 15th rapidly approaching, I'm sure every single person in this room can answer the question of what is the sole purpose of the Internal Revenue Service. It's to collect tax revenue. It has no other purpose. That's an important consideration for you to keep in mind, because what they did to 501c4 organizations, which was to stop or delay their being granted tax-exempt status, had absolutely nothing to do with tax revenue. Now, why is that? 501c4s are advocacy organizations. It's anything from the National Rifle Association to the Sierra Club on both sides of the political aisle. And they are tax exempt for a very good reason. They're nonprofits. They exist on the money they get from their members and their donors. They're not a for-profit agencies, so there's no reason to tax them, particularly because the money they're getting from their members and donors has already been taxed in the salaries of the people giving it. Now, the IRS said that it was doing this because it was examining the political activity of 501c4s, because the IRS has this rule in place, which it actually doesn't have statutory authority for, that says that if you're a 501c4, political activity can't be more than 50% of what you do. But let's assume for just a second that in fact the IRS determined that, you're actually 100% a nonprofit that engages in political activity. What would that mean? Well, it would mean that instead of being a 501c4, it would mean that you're a 527 organization. If you're a candidate, you run for office, and you start a campaign organization, that's a 527. 527s are also tax exempt. So there was no purpose in what they were doing with these applications other than to chill their activity. That was the only reason for it. And they were very effective in doing that, because anyone who's active in this area knows that what is the very first thing you do if you get a group of people together to form an organization like this? Well, you start a bank account, right? Well, you can't get a bank account unless you have what? A tax ID number, which means you've got to get your tax exempt status. So it causes all kinds of problems, and they were very effective in doing that. Now, the IG report, I think, listed 292 conservative organizations, and I think maybe 7 liberal organizations. I'm not sure why they were targeted. I guess maybe they didn't pay their dues to the DNC. The IRS went after them. Now, the point is, that was phase 1 of chilling political activity and political speech by groups who were critical of the president's policies and the things that he was doing in Washington. Phase 2 is now also being put into operation, and that is, last week was the closing date, as we just talked about, on public comments on these proposed new regulations that would completely chill the ability of any of these organizations, even after they're granted tax-exempt status, to be able to operate. And to show you how bad they are, I'll give you just one example. Under federal law, as regulated by the Federal Election Commission, where I used to be a commissioner, which regulates campaign finance law, if you're only a candidate if you're someone running for Congress or running for president. Well, the IRS regs would expand the definition of a candidate, and therefore candidate-related activity, to include any kind of nominees for office. So that means, for example, that in an election year, which we are this year, remember just yesterday, we had quite a debate and a vote over probably the most radical nominee that this president has put forward for the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, where I used to work. He was fortunately defeated. But you know, if you were a 501c4 organization, these new regs, if you talked or said anything about this nominee, that would be considered candidate-related political activity, which is, of course, totally ridiculous. Now, the way to do something about this is, first of all of the individuals, the IRS, who were involved in this need to be fired. Of course, none of that has happened. Individuals at the IRS who broke the law should be prosecuted. Is that going to happen? Well, supposedly there's a criminal investigation going on. Those are normally handled by the Public Integrity section of the Criminal Division. They apparently are involved, but the lead lawyer is not the criminal section that always does these kind of public corruption cases. No, No, the lead lawyer on this is a lawyer from the Civil Rights Division, where I used to work, which is the most politicized division in the entire department, and it's being led by a lawyer who really has no experience in these kind of public corruption cases. On the other hand, she is a major donor to the Obama campaign, so I guess probably she'll have the right attitude about this. And we know that it's been 9 months since Attorney General Eric Holder announced the opening of an investigation. Now, I will tell you that I have been involved in literally hundreds of cases. Spent 4 years at the Justice Department, been a lawyer for a long time. One of the very first things you do in a case like this where there's been allegations of public corruption is you go and you talk to the victims first, because you want to find out the details of their dealings with the public officials who are being accused of corruption, so that when you then go talk to those public officials, you've got information that you can use to check what these public officials are telling you. At 9 months, and what, Cleta, the Justice Department finally talked to you last week, right?
They called me, like Jenny Beth, when I was announced that I was going to be testifying before Congressman Jordan's subcommittee of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee on February 6th. I got a call and an email. I filed my testimony at 9:57 in the morning, and I received a phone call and a follow-up email from the Department of Justice saying, "We just wanted to be sure that you knew that we were trying to reach you." Seriously.
So the way to stop this is, one, there have to be repercussions for the individuals who engage in this kind of behavior. And if there aren't, it'll simply happen again. Second, we have to stop these new regulations that are being proposed. And quite frankly, we need to change the existing regulations on 501c4s. So that it's made very clear that when you're engaging in political activity, that in fact is an attempt to improve social welfare in this country. The IRS says that 501c4s, which are supposed to be dedicated to promoting social welfare, that if you can engage in political activity, you're not doing that. Well, that is just ridiculous. In this country, with the government as powerful as it is, whether your issue is abortion, guns, welfare, public assistance, I don't care what it is, you cannot affect that or make changes in the public policy on that without engaging in political activity, because the government controls so much of our lives today. And that in itself is a problem, just basically even with the current existing law and current existing regulations.
Thank you, Hans. Tom Fitton, king of FOIAs. Yeah, Judicial Watch has on many occasions used the Freedom of Information Act to uncover specific information from the government. Now, what do you think would be the most important piece of information that your organization could really request from the government as far as the IRS scandal is concerned?
Well, the short answer to that is everyone who's being audited should ask for their IRS files from the agency. Now, that's where the secrets lie, and if you haven't done it, you should investigate how to do it.
Ask how many people in this room have been audited in the last 3 years.
How many have been audited in the last 3 years? That's a good number.
That's a pretty good number.
I got to put my glasses on. But let me go back to the beginning, at least in terms of this of Judicial Watch. You know, we've been around for 20 years, and we became famous in the Clinton years for going after Clinton administration scandals. Well, guess what? Members of Congress like Charlie Rangel were writing letters to the IRS asking why is Judicial Watch going after Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. People were writing to the White House. So Rangel writes a letter and others writes letters to the IRS. The IRS starts sniffing around, but they didn't tell us they were auditing us yet. But a year or so later, someone writes to the White House, and the Oval Office forwards that complaint to the IRS Commissioner's Office. A few weeks later, we get our audit letter. And they wanted to know what our political affiliation was. So, you know, not misunderstanding the timing and the obviously improper purpose of the audit, we objected strongly. And we met and fought and sued and battled But we had meetings with IRS officials during which we were told, what do you expect when you scrutinize the government? If you scrutinize the government's going to scrutinize you. What do you expect if you sue the president? What do you expect? And I'm thinking, you know, I've been around Washington not that long, but long enough to know, well, that's not something the IRS is supposed to be telling people under audit. What do you expect when you scrutinize the government? What do you expect when you sue the president? And we complained and complained and complained. We met with TITCA. They didn't find anything wrong. But guess who else was running the exempt organizations branch at the time? Now, the exempt organizations branch is the branch charged with, this is where the scandal was occurring in the IRS agency that we're talking about now. Guess who was running it at the time? By the way, we weren't the only ones under audit. All the president's women were being attacked and audited. The Heritage Foundation was audited during the Clinton years. Many other conservative organizations were audited as well. But guess who was running an exempt organizations branch at the time? Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller, as you may recall, was the acting IRS commissioner who had to resign because of the new IRS audits. So the idea that someone like Stephen Miller, who ran exempt organizations, didn't know what was going on in his agency is belied by reality. Now, Stephen Miller, every time it seemed we went to complain to him about what we were suffering, they expanded the audit. So in the end, Judicial Watch was audited for the first 7 years of its tax returns. And we were 7 years old at the time, I think. So they audited us for every year we had been in existence. Let me tell you what the real scandal was. The IRS said, you know what, we'll wait until the Bush administration comes in to audit. Of course, they didn't wait. They began auditing us for real in December. We complained to the Bush administration. They did nothing to clean up the IRS. Nothing.
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing. Name any Clinton scandal, the Bush administration wasn't interested in it. And certainly the IRS was a severe scandal and didn't do anything. And of course, Stephen Miller continued to percolate up into the bureaucracy in the IRS until he became the acting IRS commissioner under Barack Obama. So that's what we get when we have Republicans who don't take this job seriously of accountable government, because they thought the American people wanted to move on.
Very interesting that you mentioned that.
But getting back to the current scandal, the IRS is in full Stonewall mode, and we filed Freedom of Information Act requests, and I'm sure even discovery in your lawsuits are difficult roads to hoe, I'm sure. So, you know, we went and asked for the FEC documents about IRS communications. Sure enough, the FEC was collaborating with the IRS, illegally it seems, I think on one of your clients, America's Futures Fund. So it goes beyond just, as we've heard before, just the IRS. It goes to other agencies. The Federal Election Commission snooping around IRS files, and Lois Lerner communicating with the FEC about essentially secret investigations or lawless investigations the FEC was conducting into conservative C4s. And I can tell you this, you know, we are doing a lot of great work here at this table, trying to expose what's going on, but it's not working in the sense they haven't stopped. These C4 regulations that are being talked about are completely lawless, And what happened was the left, the professional left, wanted the IRS to change the rules in 2010 to suppress the Tea Party. The politicos wanted it as well on the left. And the IRS was very nervous about it because they knew that to do that would upend the law, and they can't do that on their own. So they just stalled on the applications and came up with ridiculous questions to make it impossible to comply with their processes. And it had the effect of suppressing an entire movement in the run-up to an election. And that's how you steal an election in plain sight, in my view. And we now know these C4 regulations are not just about C4s. These are about all non-governmental organizations, to use the nonprofit term of art. You know, I meet with a lot of people from abroad who come and they, as you might imagine, they're interested in what Judicial Watch does. And we're very unique, even in the Western world, of having a vigorous civil society outside control of government that can be independent critics of the government. You go to Great Britain and France and the Scandinavian countries, they don't really have a conception of organizations like Judicial Watch or the Tea Party. And if they did, they would be virtually government-run. And the statists understand that in Europe, and they understand that here in the United States. So that's why they want to suppress the non-governmental organizations that are critics of the government. So when the IRS says, by the way, we're thinking of changing these rules on C4s, here are the rules, they also ask, you tell us what we think should happen to C3s and C5s and C6s. And I tell you, if these rules go through for C4s, intervention in campaigns is strictly prohibited for C3s like Judicial Watch. And if there's a rule out there that C4s mentioning a candidate around a time of an election, which is virtually any time of the year, you're going to have to be very cautious as a C3 in terms of doing activity that is, quote, prohibited by C4s, but technically is allowed in C3s. This is going to bleed over to these other organizations. And don't believe, just because there are leftists that oppose these regulations, and some do for honorable reasons, it seems, the left is willing to kill their own if it means destroying non-governmental speech in this country. I have no doubt about it. There will be leftists who object to this, whose objections will be overridden in favor of the so-called greater good of controlling our speech. So this is a dagger not only at the heart of the conservative movement and the Tea Party, but at the heart of the First Amendment, the IRS is. And the IRS, and the fight back these regulations that we suggested, is not going to be enough, because they're going to be implemented by hook or by crook. You can see that currently. I mean, practically speaking, they are being implemented, as Cleater reported. But the IRS has got to be defanged. And for Republicans to continue to hold hearings as if there's anything else to find out, practically speaking, is a waste of everyone's time, in my view. I mean, it's political posturing. The hearing yesterday was a circus. I love Darrell Issa, but it turned into a circus. And it's about time we get criminal investigations going on. That should be the only thing we're talking about. There needs to be people go to jail for abuse of the IRS. There are people who released information. There were people who released information illegally, misusing files and misusing the powers of the IRS for political purposes is outrageously illegal. That abuse of the public trust needs to be prosecuted. And the president is responsible. Is he criminally responsible? I don't know. Certainly the IRS officials were at the White House for records numbers of visits, so I don't know what went on over there. So I'm not willing to exonerate him. But he is responsible. And if we had a sensible government, he would have resigned for allowing his IRS to abuse his political opposition. That's what people were dying in the streets over in Ukraine. People being jailed because of because they were politically opposed to the ruling regime. That was what the IRS was doing. So we need to continue the litigation, we need to continue the investigations, but we need to demand criminal accountability, because the Republicans will hold hearings for world without end, especially in an election year. But when it comes to the accountability, defunding the IRS, reforming it or eliminating it, that's where the pressure points have to be. And certainly without a criminal investigation, an independent and criminal investigation, not run by something with a special counsel, the ones that were the last one most famously appointed only during the Bush administration. There's been no similar special counsel ever appointed, I think, during the Obama administration, except maybe to investigate the people defending us from terrorists. But this has got to be the end game, which is a criminal investigation that results in indictments and prosecutions.
Thank you, Tom. You know, you made a very interesting point there, that even when Republicans have the House, the Senate, the White House, and all the things that they were complaining about when they didn't have one or any of those branches, by the time they get them, they sort of stall and they decide not to do anything. If a time comes at some point when they have the House, the Senate, and the White House, perhaps conservative activists can remind them who brought them there, and perhaps the IRS perhaps can be reformed, and maybe it won't be so much kumbaya day after the election.
Well, don't think Republicans wouldn't be happy to see a lot of these groups disappear from the face of the earth. Who are we kidding? This is an incumbency protection racket, the IRS.
Okay, I think we're going to hit some Q&A with the audience. So you're concerned that the Republicans aren't fighting as much as they should?
The question, for those of you in the back of the room, related to Catherine Engelbrecht. I testified that on that panel with her. I've been working with Catherine since 2011, and the fact that after she applied for tax-exempt status for King Street Patriots, which was a 501c4, which got its C4 status about 60 days ago, and her 501c3 True the Vote, which got its 501c3 status after we sued the IRS last summer. And after she filed for this for tax-exempt status for these two organizations, she and her husband were personally audited by the IRS, not once but twice. Their family business was audited. They were visited by the FBI, 7 times by the FBI, twice by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, OSHA, the Texas Division of the EPA, and and we just don't believe that this is a coincidence. I will tell you that we filed FOIA requests from all those agencies, and I think this is really an important thing, frankly. One of the things I've been doing during all of this is making a list of things that need to change. And FOIA, which is supposed to give us access to information, is really up to the individual FOIA respondent and an agency. And I can tell you, someone asked, I'm representing one organization whose confidential tax information, its donor schedule, which is confidential by law, was released and published by their political opponents. And we FOIA'd that incident 3 separate ways, 3 different times to try to get to the bottom of it. Finally, we've sued the IRS, and the IRS told us in FOIA responses there were no documents. But now that we've sued them, there's a treasure trove of documents. And, and this is, I'm sure, what Tom has found repeatedly with Judicial Watch, because they've done a lot of FOIAs. It is a felony. If any one of you is ever speaking to an agent of the federal government in any kind of formal capacity, an investigation, an inquiry, a proceeding, if you don't tell the truth to that individual agent of the federal government, guess what? That's a felony. 18 U.S.C. 1001. It's a felony. Well, I think if the federal government, if an employee lies to me and in a formal proceeding, a document, or before Congress, well, it's already a felony to lie to Congress, but then I think that they should be prosecuted, and I don't think that we should pay for their lawyers to defend them. And I think that's something that we need to do something about.
Also makes you wonder what exactly does a contempt of Congress charge actually mean these days. You in the pink, back, right there in the middle. Yeah.
Okay, I'll
thank you.
answer that. We're talking about it because we have to make sure that people are informed. You've been paying attention, you've watched it, and you see. I've known about Catherine and what she's going through for over 2 years, and until she was before Congress less than 2 months ago.
No, less than a month ago.
Less than a month ago, most of America didn't know, and still most of America doesn't know. So just by talking about it to people who are uninformed about it and talking about the facts, as Kevin and I both have seen, people think that we're crazy when we do those things. So we have to do it in a way that gets the information out. Now, the way that I think that you're right, this has been going on forever. I've been involved in politics since the 90s, and since the 90s, I've seen Republicans and conservatives debate whether we're going to have a fair tax or a flat tax. For 2 decades, they've been debating. Either one is better than what we have right now. And I fully support, we were one of the first organizations, Tea Party Patriots, was to get on board and support Jim Bridenstine's bill to repeal the 16th Amendment. Everyone will tell you it's impossible, and my response to that is that John F. Kennedy said we're going to put man on the moon in a decade, and we did. Repealing the Constitution is changing words in the Constitution. It's not rocket science, and we're going to get it done. So we're working on that, and I encourage you to get involved with Tea Party Patriots. It's one of the big things that we'll be working on. It will take time. This has been around for over 100 years, and during that 100 years, it's grown to what it is today. We are going to get it done.
You told the audience as to how many people have been audited. We ought to have a CPAC straw poll on this. How many people got audited for the very first time in their lives since Barack Obama was elected? The reason I say that, I filed my first taxes in 1964. I never got audited. I did all my other taxes, never got audited. We got audited back in, surprise, 2011. My wife has been active, online, very active.
My husband, though, was a federal executive. He's worked for
42 years of federal service, including combat toward the Vietnam. We got audited 3 years ago. She comes back and says, "I'm so sorry, dear." And I said, "Oh, no, couldn't have happened, right? No, it's totally irrelevant." I changed my mind last year once we heard the disclosure. Look, this is, getting back to Tom's point, this is criminal activity. 42 years I served my country. If I engaged in this sort of thing as a federal senior executive, I would have been prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Class action suit, find out how many people, as individuals, have been subjected to this. Class action suit, put the damn fear of God in it. I mean, I'm serious.
I think the auditing, the part of this scandal that has just the tip of the iceberg, and we've talked about how to get our arms around this. Look, I've been doing a lot of traveling around the country for the last 8 or 9 months talking about the IRS scandal everywhere I go. That's why I say, how many people, raise your hands, because I've had so many people come up to me and say, I've never been audited before, I got involved, I gave money. Right. I understand that, but but I've asked people. I think that the IRS is using and has used donor information that nonprofits are required to disclose on a confidential. It's supposed to be a confidential schedule to the IRS. I think they've used that information, and I think they're using publicly filed campaign finance reports as a basis for selecting targets for audit. And I think that. And I did have that meeting last week with the Justice Department, 3 FBI agents, and someone from TIGTA. And when I said that was one of the things on my list. And this person from TIGTA said, well, if you have any information on that, we'd really like to see it. And I looked at him and I said, well, you're the one that has access to all the information. I don't. I can just tell you that I don't believe that it's statistically possible for all of these conservatives I've been talking to have all been audited for the first time in the last 3 years, and for that to be just a coincidence. So I think you should, and TIGTA, you need to look at how they have selected audit targets for the last 3 years.
You in the black blazer on the aisle there, left-hand side? Or am I looking?
Hi, thanks. I've heard it mentioned a couple times there about prosecutions are needed, and assuming that the Boulder Justice Department is going to do nothing or stall or create obstacles, given the balance of power in Washington right now, what is the best possible course that we can take right now? Because these hearings, as you mentioned yesterday, seem like they're going nowhere. I mean, what can be done, and who has the authority to prove that?
Sure. I would say, first of all, it's interesting because this will shed light on the criminal side of the investigation. We all started finally, I think for the most part, getting some contact from the Department of Justice, the FBI. Ours started late last year, right before Christmas. and they said, we're interested in talking to 3 clients. Since then, Barbara Bosserman got appointed, as Hans talked about, and the story leaked to Wall Street Journal that there were no criminal charges that would be filed, and the Department of Justice actually has not yet responded to our request that they actually confirmed that there's an ongoing criminal investigation into the IRS. That's where we stand today. Months later, even from their first communication with us about a handful of clients, and they will not confirm why they want to sit down with them. Because remember, when you sit down with the FBI, they can also be investigating you. You're also under perjury, and the idea here, again, that there's something more than fishy. And yesterday, after the hearing, William Taylor, Lois Lerner's attorney, said he thinks it's over for her, and actually divulged that she sat down with the Department of Justice and did a Q&A, but not under oath. Now, I'm reading that as I'm sitting up here, actually, and you're thinking, okay, we have the civil action moving forward, and I have to thank our 41 clients, and I know Cleta would thank her clients as well for actually standing up, but we could get to that, but it wasn't under oath. So what this administration knows, one hand, is that these lawsuits will take time. They may ultimately get to the information, but the administration, they don't really care about that. As long as it's after them, they get to move forward politically. So everyone keeps asking, how will this ultimately come to a close? How can we right this wrong? Well, elections have consequences. I think we all know that from the last couple of presidential elections and also some of the midterm elections. So you can ultimately right this wrong in the political realm. Lawsuits take time. I mean, we're a legal organization, but I'm admitting that. They take time. They're the last resort to correct. And they're more of a corrective to correct the wrong, those who were wrong. But to change things moving forward, which is exactly what the IRS and this administration doesn't want you to do, is to be involved and to get people elected who will make sure that this doesn't happen again. And instead, we will encourage this kind of speech in America rather than try and ban and scare people from engaging in education and telling people about the candidates and what's happening in their community. So ultimately, how will this get solved? Political change. They know that too. And how will people ultimately be held accountable? Political change.
I like people who want to get rid of the 16.
You mentioned, I think it was on Fox yesterday, about 501c5s for labor unions and similar organizations and their political activities. Am I right in thinking that those are not being investigated? And the second question is, the daughter of the former IRS commissioner under Bill Clinton is the chief of staff for Eric Holder. So how can we expect any kind of investigative activity from the Justice Department when there seems to be some kind of involvement? And potentially, what does that imply for the 2016 election?
Yeah, labor unions are under a different statutory provision, so they would in no way be affected by these new regulations on 501c4. Very, very convenient. As to the Justice Department, look, it was very telling to me when the information was leaked to the press that this particular lawyer in the Civil Rights Division, Barbara Bosserman, had been assigned to lead the investigation and was a large Obama donor, because the reaction of the department was to issue a statement saying, well, we certainly can't take her off the case. That would be a personnel action based on politics, and that's illegal under the law. That is completely and totally wrong. A personnel action is when you fire somebody or change their pay or reassign them from their current job to something else because of their political activity. And nobody is saying that federal employees can't make political donations. They're allowed to do that. But I used to work at the Justice Department, and I'm very familiar with the conflict of interest rules. And there's a Justice Department regulation that specifically says that lawyers must not only avoid conflicts of interest, they must avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest that would make the public question the integrity of an investigation. And so the idea that they would not reassign someone else to the case, I mean, that is just a completely false statement. And, you know, Eric Holder was asked about this in an oversight hearing, I think by Ted Cruz. And he had exactly the same reaction. And so it's very clear that they are not going to take any steps to make sure that we have a real investigation because they're refusing to take even the most basic step to get rid of a clear conflict of interest in the case.
This side over here.
Tom Zalesowski from the Portage County Tea Party, okay, and we're there now, we're one of our clients. I want to leave you with a hopeful message, okay, because what Tom is saying is a fact, folks. This is criminal, okay? This is a criminal element. We are not going to defeat them on their own terms. Now, I talked to, ACLJ said, folks, we're going to wait for a new president before we get anything done, okay? But Jenny Beth said the most important thing is, and that is we have to keep fighting because we only have an electoral solution. Okay, now a good friend of yours, Bill Todd from Columbus, a great attorney, has come up with a solution. Because folks, one thing that hasn't been told to all of us, and there's not about this, we never want to be 501c4s. When Jenny Beth talked about, we have to get a federal tax ID, or Tom said about that, well, why? Because we're taking bus trips, and we need liability insurance, right? And we need a bank account to pay the bus company. So what do we want to be? We're business people. We want to be LLCs. We want to be a corporation. They said, oh, no, that's political activity. You can't do that. Fine. Attorney Bill Todd in Columbus has come up with a great solution for all of us. And it ties into Citizens United. Okay? The Citizens United really gives us some free political speech. Okay? And what we've become is taxable nonprofits. Bill Todd has said we will be taxable nonprofits. So the Ohio Citizens PAC is a PAC, but the We the People Convention, the Portage County Tea Party, the Dayton Tea Party are taxable nonprofits. And so what does that mean? We pay our taxes. What does that mean? We don't have to tell the IRS a damn thing. We don't have to tell them anything. We file a 1120 tax form just like everybody else. So the answer is to not play their game. The answer is to take yourself out of the game. And here's the thing that was brilliant about Bill Todd, who's a very experienced attorney in political activities. There's a little IRS rule that even the IRS wasn't really familiar with. And that is that any donations to a corporation are not considered income. They're considered contributions to taxpayer equity. If you send $10,000 to Ford Motor Company because you like your F-150 truck, you send them $10,000, I love my truck, that is not income to Ford Motor Company, and they don't have to pay taxes on it. So every donation you get does not count as income towards your taxes. So you don't pay any taxes anyway. But here's the point. We pay all our taxes. We've been paying taxes our whole lives. Just like the churches with 501c3s. Why do we 501c3? Pay your taxes and have free speech. Because that's the only way we're going to win this battle, is to have free speech, to elect people who will help repeal the 16th Amendment of the IRS and put in a fair tax, and fight them. And then I have one more thing that you have to understand is really critical. There's a narrative going on by the media that just came out. Thomas Sowell wrote this little thing, and Chris Stockwell wrote this thing and said, you Tea Party people just don't understand that you can't change anything without power. So quit fighting these incumbent Republicans because they might lose, okay, and elect them all, and then we'll fix it when we're in power. Except for one thing. When they're in power, they don't fix a damn thing. What Mark Kennedy told you is that they haven't fixed anything in his lifetime. So why do you think they would do? You think John McCain wants us to be around? No! Okay, you think they want us to just do this, and if we elect them? So that's why when Jenny Beth and Freedom Works and all these people are going after Republicans in primaries, we're not trying to destroy the Republican Party, we're trying to save the Republican Party by restoring Republican values, and that's there. So don't buy the bullcrap and don't play their game and opt out and find good people like this to help guide you. And we will win this whole thing.
Thank you. All right, wow, it's turning into a nice brainstorming session like an old CPAC. All right, a couple more questions. We're going to have to wrap it up soon. You all the way in the left-hand corner, young man right there.
Afternoon, I'm Brian Clark from Central Connecticut State University, and Tom with Judicial Watch. I know you did a lot of work last year with the White House stealing the visitor records with Judicial Watch and calling that. Do you think there's any relationship between them doing this unprecedented action and the IRS with them trying to keep who's visiting a secret?
Not directly. I mean, but long story short is the Bush administration, after they got too many questions about White House visitors, decided that White House visitor records weren't subject to the Freedom of Information Act, which was an extraordinary legal position. The most transparent administration in history came in and continued that legal position. Unfortunately, it's been upheld despite our legal objections to it. But they make a lot of noise about releasing these records 90 days after visits take place, except for those records they don't want to release. And of course, they say there's no accountability to a court as to what's being released or not. And unfortunately, they've been upheld in that regard. So the visitor logs are only one piece of the puzzle. The Republicans and conservatives generally have an awful record of using the tools available to us in Washington, D.C. for government accountability, whether it be congressional oversight, Justice Department processes, or even the media. And, you know, we have power. I don't think we don't have power. We have power. The question is it going to be utilized effectively? And if there was a coordinated effort and the Republicans decided, remember when this story first broke? President Obama was stricken. He was stricken. He was outraged. It was like this is not something they wanted. They were very afraid of the issue. You know, and then several months later, he said there's not a smidgen of corruption. And if Republicans said, you know what, not a dollar will fall from the sky in Washington until there's a special counsel appointed to investigate these crooks, that would happen. Anything Republicans want to happen in the administration, practically speaking, in terms of these processes, wouldn't happen if they put their metal to it. And that's the sort of thing that we can get done. And we don't need to control the House, and we don't need to control the Senate for that to happen. Of course, we being conservatives, but Republicans do control the House. So it's really, there's no reason there shouldn't be a special counsel to at least give the appearance, which is important, that there's an investigation going on. The fact there has been no grand jury impaneled means there's nothing going on. They can meet with people as much as they want, but the FBI, you know, we've met with the FBI many times about criminal corruption scandals in the various administrations, and that's not a grand jury.
All right, I'm afraid that we can't take any more questions. We're going to have to wrap this up. So I'd like to thank our panelists. Jordan Sekulow, Cleta Mitchell, Jenny Beth Martin, Kevin Kukaji, Hans von Spakovsky, yes, and Tom Fitton.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm
And
Carrie
thank you,
Pickett.
Carrie.